So before we start with some new topics here, if any of you have some question from this morning, please. 10 seconds. No, maybe long. No, nothing.
Question about the transition. How do you communicate during transition?
Yeah. So the question is about communication during transition. I think there's two important parts to the communication that I think you have to train. I think you have to be very focused on the communication of the setter. That they're going to set the ball, or if not, they're going to describe who will and where to set it. So I think that's a big part of the communication. The second part is probably more important in transition, or actually transition is no different than, I think, out of system serve receive. It's something, the whole game really can be described as preparing to attack from some range of situations. So the less accurate the reception, the bigger range the setter goes into, I think the more important is the communication by the hitter. The hitters, are they ready? Do they want the ball? What's the speed? What's the rhythm? All of those conditions, I think, become more important. And I think when you walk into someone's practice or the training, if there's a lot of noise, it's usually a pretty good thing. Not always, but it's usually a pretty good thing because a lot of communication is going on. Team sports and communication are married. You really have to work hard at that, I think, from the coach.
Audible.
Yeah, it's an audible system for me means a change from maybe what the setter would like to have done, what the coach would like to have done in an ideal reception situation or a really controlled ball. So audible is changing that based on decision making, volleyball IQ, what the hitter can do. And it's a big part, I think, of training the hitters. They have to recognize what the setter can do, whether the setter can get to the ball, what position the setter is going to be in when they get to the ball. They have to know the setter. I think a lot of the communication that you engage with when you talk one-on-one to players is certainly about them. But what do they know about their teammate? Tell me what's good about this player, that. What do they do well? What are they not so good at? Where do they struggle? How can we help them? Stuff like that. We talk a lot about the best players making the players around them better. To do that, you have to know the other players. You have to really be familiar, comfortable, knowledgeable. That's a balance. Anything else about that? Okay. So one of the topics this afternoon is the rules of the game and what the game is going to look like in the future. And so, there's a lot of stuff. How many of you love the game right now? No changes? Boy, it's fantastic. Yeah? Okay. Well, I disagree with all of you. Yeah, so what do you like about the game? The way it's played now, the rules now, the system of play. What do you
salaries, we like the salaries. We all very rich men.
Okay, we like that there's more and more money
related to
doesn't
the
have so much
subject.
to the rules. Yeah.
That's related to the subject, changing the rules. In the FIPP month, no?
I don't think so. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe. What do we like about the game? What's good? Because those of you who are, I don't know, more than 40 years old, or 45, certainly you can remember that there have been a lot of very significant rule changes in our sport. I mean, really major changes in the sport.
היו הרבה שינויים במשחק לאורך השנים.
For sure, going from side-out scoring to rally scoring, big change. Playing to 25 rally point scores. Adding the libero, big change. Adding another touch. Serve touching the net, going in, big change. A lot of really big changes. So, all of them, most of you think, make the sport much better.
Passing, allowed to make a goal and
Passing overhand. Yeah. So, this is, I don't know if this is a rule or interpretation. So, so talk to me about the fundamental nature of the sport. What is it about volleyball that you like? That's really good, maybe because of the rules or in spite of the rules. I don't know. But most of you like the game right now. Most of you raise your hand. You like the game.
מה טוב או מה יפה היום במשחק? זה מה שהוא שואל.
Nothing specific about it that you like, though.
No contact.
Yeah, no contact. Yeah, I think that's going to be hard to change, but for sure, there is no contact, and you like that about the game.
it's a fact.
Yeah, and I think it's a characteristic of the kind of athlete that is interested in volleyball, or that is gravitates toward volleyball. Yeah, I agree. I think that's true.
If I would like to think one step ahead, so I would say maybe that I like rally and then maybe take the net 5-7 and more. Of course for the women, maybe for the men, if athleticism is going to get better and better during the years, maybe take maybe 5.
So you said, I think, very important part of the sport. The game is called volleyball. It means to volley or rally the ball, or keep the ball in play. So what's happening right now to the rally? So you like that or you don't like that?
For the mainstream eye, I think to make the game more popular, it needs to be more rally. The spike, as coaches, we really want to see the amazing spike in a little line, but for the game to get more popular, it needs more rally.
נועם דיבר על זה שיהיה יותר רלי במשחק, זה מה שיעשה אותו יותר מעניין.
I think if we look at the game and we talk about the fundamental nature or the fundamental characteristics of the sport, we're going in an opposite direction from the fundamental characteristic of the sport. So it's a volley sport that somehow means to keep the ball in play, and yet the rallies are going down by almost any measure. So we can measure the rally by the time. It's an okay measure, I guess. But the real measure is how many times the ball goes across the net. I think the number of net crossings.
מספר פעמים שכדור עובר מצד לצד של הרשת בירידה, כמו גם זמן הכדור באוויר. המדד מבחינתו זה כמה פעמים הוא עובר מצד לצד.
And I would suggest that there are two things that are a big problem, at least for me. One is that the net crossings are very low and not increasing, but either the same or a little bit down. And the ending of the rally comes too frequently with what we call an unforced error. So someone hits a serve into the net or out of bounds, or an attack into the net or out of bounds, or an ace serve.
הרבה פעמים הרלי נגמר או בשגיאה או בכדור או באייס, והוא... זה מה שזה. שגיאה לא מחויבת, זה לא מה זה להרחיק לאוט.
So those are either 0 or 1 net cross. 0 or 1. Agree or yeah, okay. So frequently we talk about some balance between attack and defense. That this could be a good thing. I'm not so interested in this, frankly. I'm interested in increasing the net crossings because statistically it's easy to show when the ball crosses the net more times, the balance becomes closer to 50-50. The more times the ball crosses the net, the closer we get to 50-50. Which is quite logical, actually.
המאזן בין ההגנה להתקפה מתבטא בכמה פעמים הכדור עובר מצד לצד, ככל שהוא עובר יותר זה מאזן את בין ההתקפה להגנה. זה מה שמעניין אותו, אם הוא עושה שינוי בחוקה.
So I think, for me, I want to do two things. I want to make it more difficult to kill the ball. I want to make it harder for the attacking team to kill the ball because that's the same for both sides. And I would like to eliminate or reduce, I would like to reduce the unforced errors. I'd like for the winning side in the rally to have to score the point more times than the losing side make a mistake.
שיותר פעמים הקבוצה שתזכה בנקודה תעשה אותה בעצמה ולא על ידי טעות של היריב.
And this is just my opinion because we don't have very good statistics, evaluation about this second point, about the number of unforced errors in the game. But I think it's quite high compared to other team sports. Part of it is the nature of the sport. I understand that. Do you guys understand?
מספר הטעויות הלא מחויבות הוא גבוה יחסית לענפי כדור.
No, you don't like that. Okay.
Excuse me, Oli. I don't think it's that.
Just a bad translation.
I'm not sure. It's a question.
Yeah.
Unforced mistake is the opposite of a forced mistake, which means a strong spike. And it's not a mistake if I can take it to defense.
Correct. That's not a mistake.
So it's a forced mistake.
Right. But the unforced mistake is I hit the ball out of bounds, I hit the ball into the net, I serve out of bounds, or I serve into the net. That's not exactly unforced either because there are times I think most of us would agree the block is very intimidating. It's hard to measure that, huh? The block you're going to talk about with statistics maybe a little bit. But from a definition point of view, just from a definition point of view, nobody touched that ball. Only the player performing the action. Okay? So no second touch. If there's no second touch, that's an unforced mistake. Okay? But at least by definition.
טעות לא מחויבת בהגדרה זה משהו שהוא בשליטה שלך לגמרי ואתה עושה טעות. אתה לאוט, לרשת, שלא קשורה לשחקנים אחרים.
So I would like to see, sorry, somebody, I would like to see when we make changes to the game, we think about what's the fundamental objective that we're trying to make the change for. What's the purpose of the change? Why do we want the game to look a certain way? What's the objective here? For me, the objective is more times across the net for the ball. To do that, I think, just my opinion, nobody else, we have to make it more difficult to kill the ball. Okay, how can we do that? What can we do to make it more difficult to kill the ball? There's some relatively easy things. Huh? You can make the net much higher. Okay. What happens when we make the net higher also? It will be harder to kill the ball.
It will be easier to serve receive.
Yeah. Probably easier to serve receive, but I think over some time, something else will happen. Maybe it's going to happen anyway. Players are going to get bigger and bigger. And the player who is average is going to go away. Yeah, and I think one of the other characteristics of our sport, that's maybe you agree, maybe you don't agree, is positive, is that to be really good at this sport, you have to be able to do many parts of it. You can't just do one thing. Sometimes it's okay. But I think that's a component of the sport that we like. And so raising the net, to me, is something that might never stop. So this year we're going to go up 5 centimeters. Next year maybe another 5. I don't know.
העלאת גובה הרשת היא לא פתרון בשבילו, כי תוצאים למשחק שחקנים בגובה מסוים, וזה תהליך שלא יהיה לו סוף, וזה אולי גם יביא להתמחות יותר גדולה משיש כבר היום.
But I can tell you for sure, there is some discussion about this, a lot of discussion about raising the net. And then what's the right amount for men, for women, for juniors, for high school, becomes a complicated process.
Alex said double contact in the second ball.
Yeah. So, what is it? He's a Russian speaker. Yeah. So, I try to...
A lot of good ideas.
Something later, a lot of good ideas.
This of course was a joke, Alex, זה היה בדיחה, אבל this is what he said, the second goal.
Yeah, not in my history. Maybe some other older people's history. But I think this is an interesting point. There's a lot of subjective evaluation required by the officials in our sport, mostly for ball handling. Double hit, throw, carry, whatever we call it now. And one of the objectives, I think, should also be to make the game very transparent, certainly to the players and to the coaches, but also to the spectators.
לפשט את המשחק, להוריד מהשופטים את הצורך ולקבוע דברים שהם לא מדויקים, שהם על סמך התחושה או אי אפשר למדוד אותם.
And for sure, there is a point of view that if somebody makes a very bad ball handling play, the team is probably penalized because it's not a very accurate action. It depends. It's a very difficult issue, but I tend to agree. And if we look at beach volleyball and volleyball, and we want to try to bring the rules maybe closer together, a similar kind of concept for ball handling could be better. So a double hit or defense, or even for the setter, it's not so bad. So maybe something to consider. I'm not so opposed to this idea. To make it harder to kill the ball, I don't know if that does it though. What else? Make it, yeah.
Another thing, also, playing, we're getting the defense position with 7 players. Cannot spike, my block, play defense.
כל שחקן בהגנה, שתהיה בו.
Add a 7th player
שבעה
to the
שחקנים.
court.
Just in practice situation, all defense, all blocking, but you
So
cannot spike.
if this person runs in and out of the court or no?
When you set, when you go to make a service, it's out.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
When you make reception, it's out.
So he only plays half the time.
Just the service is not. You have just 3 players in reception,
Okay.
then you say 7.
Okay.
You get 7.
Could be. So harder to kill the ball because we have more players to play defense.
All blocking.
Or blocking, yeah. So some of you maybe remember, maybe not, but one of the rules in the United States when I started to play was only 6 players, but 1 player from the second line goes to the front line, so 4 players would be eligible to block. For many years.
בארצות הברית, עד לפני כמה שנים היו מותר לחסום 4 שחקנים.
I think there's still a couple of easy ones. To hit from, so the only possibility is to hit from off the net. Something like that. I think there's 2 easy ways to do that are easier than just requiring to hit from the back row. So we don't have to, it's not like a guessing game here, we don't have to worry about that. But one of the things I think about volleyball that is not part of the fundamental nature of the game is open hand tipping. Okay? For sure indoor. Beach, it's not allowed. Huh? You have to diss or soft hit or something.
להשוות החוק עם החוף, לא לאפשר חור באצבעות.
So one of the rule changes for me, impossible to open hand tip the ball. You can't do it. Especially for the setter, when the setter is front row. Can't do it.
במיוחד למוסר שהוא בקו קדמי.
I would take this out of the game immediately. 1. Second rule, I think, that might be interesting if the objective is to keep the rally going is the block can block anything. Before the hitter hits or the setter. You can block the setter.
חסימה שתוכל לחסום כל מה שהיא מגיעה אליו, כולל מסירה של כדור שני, כולל כדור שעוד לא הגיע למנחית ואפשר לגעת בו.
I don't know about the serve. Maybe the serve, maybe not the serve. I'd like to test it because at one point, not so long ago, we were blocking the serve. But it was before the serve was very popular for a jump spike serve. The problem with blocking the serve is that most of the time that ends the rally. So no net crossings. That's against what I'd like to see happen. And do you know the number of net crossings that is the average right now? So for men, if we get to 3, it's a good rally. It's under 3.
מתחת לשלוש פעמים הכדור עובר בממוצע בכדורעף גברים, מצד לצד.
Everything, then you would shorten the rally for sure.
Or maybe my reception will not be so close. Yeah. So if we bring the setter off the net, I don't know, maybe, because we're not testing this yet. But if we bring the setter off the net, then not so many quick sets, more good position for the block, more time for the defense. I don't know, maybe. What I think we want to do, maybe possible. I really don't know, because I think speed is part of every sport right now. I don't think we're going to slow that down. And the best teams, as I told you here earlier this morning, the best teams are playing very fast even when the ball is off the net. They're just not going as frequently to the first tempo, the so-called first tempo, but still fast. And I don't know. So I think there's a lot of fundamental nature of the sport that's fantastic, that we want to keep. For me, I want to keep rotation. I like rotation. I want to keep the really skilled, multi-skilled player in the game. Can play defense, can block, can hit.
חשוב לו לשמור על
I want to do that.
כל הכישורים של השחקנים שישחקו בכל העמדות.
The game is gradually getting for bigger and bigger players already, because every sport is like that. Because the general population is healthier, more fit. You know, sports medicine is influencing the characteristics of the athlete. So I don't think we have to worry about that. The problem with net height, I think, is where do you stop? It just keeps going. I think it's not a fixed issue. And you know, by the same token, to make it harder to kill the ball, we could make the court much smaller. That's changing the fundamental nature, for me, of the game. So I think, I don't know, those are some of the things. Certainly we're trying to play around with the 3-meter line and the service line as a landing line, not a takeoff line.
מדובר היום על רצון לבחון את האפשרות ששחקן לא יוכל לנחות בתוך המגרש בסרב ותנו לסיים, וגם לנחות בתוך המגרש בסרב ולנחות בתוך תחום השלוש במקום מקו החול. זה נבחן עכשיו יותר בסרב, פחות במקו החול.
עכשיו, באליפות העולם, מתחיל 23.
כן, באליפות העולם עד 23, כולל משחקים שנתוב מ-7 עד 15.
What else can you think of that would make the game more interesting, varied? What about you as a coach? What would help you create your team to be a little bit different than the other team? So my team is different than your team, etc., which is a problem, I think, today also. Too many teams exactly the same. Play the same. Yeah. Huh? Yeah. A little bit.
Told us you were thinking about this. Maybe you explain a little bit? No.
It's a bad thing. It's a bad thing.
Substitution.
Yeah. Say this again. Yeah.
The substitution.
Yeah. I think the substitution, if we change the substitution rule just a little bit, not so much. So right now we have a total of 6 substitutions, 2 entries. What if we went to, I don't know, that would really change the game, unlimited. And I can tell you what that looks like because in the United States, we have one group of universities that play with unlimited substitution, complete, as many as you want. And all of those teams look very similar because this takes the idea of specialization, I think, and changes the very characteristic of the sport. But suppose we went to 8, from 6 to 8, and we also made it so that you start, I go in for you, you come for me. So it's not required that just 2 people occupy the same position.
לפתוח את עוד הצעה שהוא חושב שיכולה לעזור זה להעלות את כמות החילופים ולאפשר חילופים במספר עמדות, לא רק מול שחקן אחד. Which could be a problem if we go to the back row or out and come.
It could be a problem, but it also could be an interesting opportunity for the coach. Because one of the things that has happened with the game changing from side-out scoring to rally scoring is that the effect of the coach has been, I think, diminished, has been reduced. Because the game is much shorter now, it's about 60% of what the game used to be, the duration. And I think this is another problem for me. Of all the team sports in the world, volleyball, when we have a 3-0 match, is the shortest. The amount of activity is less than any of the other team sports.
מכל המשחקים, משחקי הכדורעף שנגמר 3-0 הוא הכי קצר, שזה בעיה.
And so, your ability as a coach to affect how your team plays and therefore the outcome is reduced. Maybe that's good for some coaches, maybe it's good, maybe bad, I don't know. But for me, being a coach, part of the motivation to coach is to have some impact on how my team plays and the outcome of the match.
ההשפעה של המאמן במשחק קצר היא כמובן יורדת ויותר קצרה, וזה בעייתי.
I'd like to think that if I work harder and I'm smarter and I'm more creative and I interact with my players better, that I can have more impact than another team and maybe be better. I'd like to think it's not just about am I a better recruiter? Do I find better players? But can I train them? Can I come up with a better idea, a better system of play? Anyway, so I think that's also an important part of the rules. But here's the problem. We make lots of changes, and we don't study the changes because we don't really have an idea of what we're trying to get to. What do we want the game to look like? What is important? What's the fundamental nature of the game? And so right now, at least from FIVB, the fundamental nature of the game is we have to play inside 2 hours. That's it.
יש לו ביקורת על מה שקורה ב-FIVB, שהמטרה שלו היא לא המשחק כמו שהוא קודם ניסה להסביר, אלא דבר אחד, להכניס את המשחק למשבצת של שעתיים.
So that's easy. Just keep reducing the number of points so the game will be finished within 2 hours. But as long as we play 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 7, it doesn't matter. We can control the longest game, but we can't control the shortest. So we're going to have this big variation between the shortest and the longest.
הבעיה תהיה בכל שינוי כזה, כמו שעכשיו, 4 מתוך 7, שהפער בין המשחק הקצר לארוך הוא מאוד גדול. בניגוד לענפי כדור אחרים, מהטניס.
So what else about rules? Anybody else have any ideas? Looks like you have. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just one player is allowed to start from the battle. Maybe another sure. Right now, 5 players starting almost every time.
Yeah. Could be, yeah.
He's not receiving, he's fighting.
Yeah. So we identify a special player like the libero player, yeah, with a jersey or something. Could be, yeah.
Maybe we need to change the whole concept of best of 5 or 7 sets. We change it, for example, like innings in baseball. So one inning, one team got to do 2 complete rotations, then the other team. And then the team that make more points on the serving line win the inning. Or consecutive scoring.
Or why don't we just play with the clock? Play with the clock. Like that.
אפשר גם לשחק עם שעון, זה דבר מוזר בעבר בארצות הברית.
Size and the shape of the ball. The balls, the size and the...
Yeah, this is really interesting, I think.
גודל הכדור.
Yeah. So this actually has been studied quite a lot. So if we make the ball slightly larger, just a little bit, not very much, and a little bit softer, so the pressure is different, what happens? The speed goes way down of the ball, the speed of the ball after its contact. So right now, so there are some men who are hitting a jump serve almost 80 miles an hour. I don't know what that is in kilometers. It's a lot. 120, 110, something like that. It's a lot. And if we just slightly increase the size of the ball, the speed can be reduced almost 25%. We have really good data on this one.
אם יגדילו טיפה את הכדור, אפשר להוריד 25% מהמהירות שלו.
And you would have a difficult time if you had one of them in your hand with the real ball. You wouldn't know it very easily. Yeah, you have to play with it a little bit. Yeah, it's not so hard.
They replaced this one in 2008.
Yeah.
So the less responsive involved.
It doesn't move so much.
Yeah. Players were there eliminated that.
And they made a lot more money with the ball too. Anyway, what else? A couple other things.
Maybe the court smaller.
Make the court smaller, yeah.
Took it off and then took it back again. Somebody's not cooperating or involved in the play itself.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting, this would change, of course, the fundamental history of the game, I think, because we've played 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5 for a long time. But for many, many years in the U.S. at our national championships, we played with a clock. It's called ball in play clock. Okay? Maybe I don't know just so well. The problem was we started the clock when the server hit the ball. You have to start the clock with the reception. I think it's better. Okay? Because otherwise I can serve the ball high, depends on the ceiling, and lose some time. You still have to win by 2 points, but you can play some of the sets were 9-7, 5-3. This was old side-out scoring. But if we really are concerned with time, the time of the match, I'm afraid the only solution is with a clock. Really. Or we're going to have a range between the shortest matches and the longest. You can't avoid it. If we're playing 2 out of 3, 3 out of 5, 4 out of 7. So there's a study going on right now of 4 out of 7 to 15 rally score. And one second, I'll add. The fundamental problem with lowering the number of points. What is the fundamental problem? Statistically, it's easy to demonstrate statistically with math. The fundamental problem as we go down in points is that the result becomes random. So if you like, if your objective is only excitement, so that between your team and my team we flip a coin, maybe you win, maybe I win, we should play to 5 points. Perfect. We have no idea who's going to win. If your team is much better than mine, you shouldn't be very happy with this. If my team is not so good, I'm very happy. Because playing for a very short amount of time gives me a much better statistical opportunity to win.
הבעיה עכשיו עם הניסוי של יש באליפות העולם גיל 23 כתוב מ-7 עד 15 שזה נותן שהתוצאה היא יותר מקרית וקבוצות חלשות יכולות לנצח קבוצות טובות כי פשוט כמות הנקודות היא קטנה מדי.
So if you work for the FIVB and you're interested in selling sponsorship and tickets and that's your most important objective, I think you're quite interested in this solution. Yeah, or gambling, yeah. But I think the gamblers are not going to be so happy about it because it will be very difficult to set the odds. And you know, if you play a soccer football match and we stop at 10 minutes, is it very satisfying? You don't know who's going to win. And whoever is leading at 10 minutes may or may not be winning at the end. So there's some, and statistically this is easy to demonstrate. Sorry, you had a question.
I had a question about why is it a problem that there is a difference between the games, like time-wise? If there is a shorter game, it's probably less interesting than a longer game. Because longer game probably like the teams have a better game to watch. So if it's short, it means it's not good for anyone.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah, for sure, this is true. Yeah, generally, I think less with rally scoring, but generally, if the match is 3-0, it's because one team is much better than the other team. So less interesting, etc. But there are, I don't know what the percentage is, but lots of examples, many examples, where the score is within 2 points, okay? And much more now with rally scoring, a 2-point win by set than in the old side-out scoring, because here's the length of the average match with side-out scoring. Here's the average match now with rally scoring. So yes, what you say has some validity, but only a little bit more than this could be a really good 3-set match. And this 5-set match could also be 25-10, 15-25. It's just, we're playing such a short amount of time that we really don't have enough actions in the game to differentiate between the good team and the bad team on enough basis. And when we add in the percent of, I'm sorry to use this term, unforced errors, it becomes like a two-edged sword. We lose both directions. And we hear this, actually what you say exactly, we hear that a lot from the media and the sponsors, etc. And I understand that very well. I spent a lot of years in a position where really the responsibility was go raise money, make money, and elevate the popularity of the sport. But we're coaches now, I hope, or sort of. And so I want to argue that there are significant flaws, significant problems with every sport. And the responsibility is to, I think, I want to try to sell this to you. our responsibility is to coach our teams to such a high level of play that it's compelling. It's a compelling athletic contest. It's a compelling event. So part of that is what you do as a coach. And part of it is how your team and how the match is presented. All kinds of ways to make it more interesting and exciting. So you can go to a basketball game, a professional basketball game in the United States, in any of the big arenas, and there are times you don't even know the basketball game is happening because there's so much else going on. It takes a lot of money and a lot of preparation, etc. But I want to say we have to get to this point. We have to move in this direction. But also, the game is pretty compelling. The game is pretty exciting. Whether it's ice hockey, basketball, American football, you know, whatever the sport is, the coach really controls the game itself. Somebody else or a group of people control what's going on around the game. Both have to be really good, I think. So I don't know, just giving you my ideas. Not for sure what.
דאג ניסה פה להדגיש את המחויבות שלנו כמאמנים לדאוג לזה שהמשחק יהיה מעניין ונכון, ולא לדאוג לדברים האחרים של שיווק גם בתור מאמנים, של שיווק, טלוויזיה ודברים האלה. הוא מדבר מנקודת מבט של מאמן על המשחק.
And I don't want to spend much more time on this because I want to talk about some of the things. I'm going to switch one other topic. Okay. But yeah, go ahead.
What about the idea to play anyway concept? Even if then, you know, teams can get different points, even if they started at 3-0, but in the end lose like 3-2. Still, you know, able to do like comeback in the last two sets. So you kind of fix the time of the game.
Yeah, it's possible. So one of the, I have to think for 10 seconds. One of the priorities is, for me, every time the team walks on the floor, every set, every match should be really important. I don't ever want to say to the players, it doesn't matter if you win this game or this set, it's not as important. But that's one possible solution. Yeah, I prefer a clock because I think it has other values. But I think the point I'm trying to get to, I guess, is that as coaches, we want to have, I don't know, a lot of control, a lot of input into what the game looks like. So we should be deciding, or certainly we should be sitting at the table when the decision is being made about rules, rule changes, because what's fundamentally the characteristic, the nature of the sport that we like, and how do we get that integrated into our team at the highest possible level we can. Reducing errors, keeping the ball in play, making it harder to kill the ball, keeping, you know, counterattack, maybe becoming the most fundamental part of the game. I love the slogan of the FIVB. I wish they would perform to it. Keep the ball flying. Keep the ball flying. It's really what defines volleyball. Why don't we call it volleyball? Okay. Any other ideas about rules? We're going to go on to something else. I'll tell you about it. It's a good segue into it. Think about it anyway. Maybe come up with some good rules. Here's another problem. I'm going to talk about statistics now, not one of the other topics, but I want to talk about statistics. Volleyball statistics are a big problem, I think. It's harder to to analyze why is that the case. Because we play 3 out of 5 sets. So are the statistics important set by set, or are the statistics important for the match? Okay. You have to know this right away.
מדובר על סטטיסטיקה, הוא שואל האם אנחנו צריכים לחשוב על סטטיסטיקה כל מערכה או למשחק שאנחנו מנתחים את המספרים במשחק שלנו.
Yeah, for sure. For sure, he said the set. Yeah. So if you look at statistics for the match, yeah, I mean, you know this intuitively, I think. You can understand this because we win one set by, I don't know, 25 to 10 or 25 to 12. And all the rest can be very close. So that one set influences, skews the numbers dramatically. So the numbers that we get, the averages for sure, for the match, don't tell us very much. They aren't very important. So if you're looking at those, you know, they're medium. So let me talk a little bit about statistics here.
המספרים של משחק שלם לא נותנים תמונה נכונה, וצריך לעבוד לפי מערכה.
And so it's pretty interesting for me because volleyball is an easy game to define by numbers a lot. Okay, so talk to me about serving, because we were talking about serving. What's important to know about serving for our team? It's easy. This is easy. Okay, what does that mean? So that means serving average, I think. So some serving average is a number based on the opponent's quality of reception. Totally. That's all it is. Okay? My serving score is the inverse of your passing score. Okay? So if we use some number, 4 rating, 5 rating, 6 rating, it doesn't matter what it is, the total between your reception and my serve should equal that number, minus the aces and errors. Okay? That's all it is. Okay? Serving average.
מדידה של הסר,
I don't know what you come up with is
של הממוצע,
3.37, 3.1,
מול
whatever number it is.
ההצלחה של הקבלה מצד שני, איזושהי נוסחה שמורידה גם את השגיאות ואת האיס.
But we want to know some other things about serving. What else do we want to know about serving? I think as a skill example. What else? Anybody? Nothing else? Don't want to know anything else about serving? Come on, coaches. Yeah, maybe. You said, yeah. Oh, speed. Here we go. What's important about speed? No. Maybe. No, I mean, for sure, yeah. But the important thing about speed is, does speed have any correlation to reception performance? If I hit the ball harder, does it mean you pass the ball less accurately?
כשמדברים על מהירות צריך לבדוק האם יש לה השפעה על הקבלה.
But
מהירות של הסר.
this is completely easy to understand. Completely, and to measure easily. You buy a speed gun. How many of you use a speed gun in practice? Yeah. Nobody is using a speed gun. You have to go back. Excuse me. Please buy a speed gun. They're not so expensive.
אקדח שמודד את מהירות הסר.
Nobody is using a speed gun. Wow. Yeah. Yeah. So, when you buy the speed gun, not if, you have to get one. Because this is, you can have the 5-year-old child come out and they will give you exactly the correct number every time. It's incredibly easy. But speed is correlated with serving performance. There is a correlation and it's positive. I can't tell you how positive because it's going to be different on every team. But I can tell you that in almost 100% of the cases, at least from high school above, maybe even lower, speed is positively correlated with serving average.
יש מתאם כמעט של 100% בין מהירות הכדור לממוצע של הסר. זאת אומרת, הוא משפיע על הקבלה.
So we have to use it in training.
ולכן צריך לקנות את זה.
So the players understand the mechanics and the kinesthetic feeling for hitting the ball 25 miles an hour versus 35 miles an hour. There's a big difference.
שחקנים צריכים לדעת להבחין בין סרט שעובר 25 קמ"ש, 50 קמ"ש ל-80 קמ"ש.
And for men, how many, most of you must be coaching men, so you're jump serving, spike serving, and a lot of women are doing the same thing at an earlier and earlier age. You have to be able to train the player to hit the ball at some specific velocity for them, and it will also have a positive correlation. So we have to know that, I think. It's pretty important. Somebody else said direction.
נושא שני בסר זה הכיוון שלו.
So what do we know and how do we do this? That's also, I think, pretty easy about direction. We have to know that first, the player has the ability to serve the ball into some different areas. And what is the reception average when they serve the ball into zone 1, zone 6, zone 5, or 2, 3, or 4? I don't know how many zones they can serve into with some degree of accuracy. But for sure, there is a correlation between serving the ball into different areas. And I think you're going to find, because I'm old and I've done this a long time, I think you're going to find that regardless of the quality of your impression of the receiver, that the server will have more success, a higher average, serving in some areas than others. They will hit a better serve. They'll be performing at a higher level. The serve will have more velocity, more movement, more accuracy, whatever. I can't tell you what it is because it'll be different for each player, but you want to know that.
צריך לדעת ששחקנים, הסרט שלהם הוא לא דומה לכל עמדה במגרש, ולכל עמדה יש לו איכות אחרת, והמאמן צריך לדעת את זה. וזה גם משפיע כמובן על הקבלה.
I think it's going to be there, but I don't know for sure. So you need to know that. What else do we need to know about serving? I guess what I'm trying to show you is, I think, the most basic skills of the game, there are very complicated ways to evaluate them. So what else do we want to know about serving?
Spin on the ball.
Somebody said, what?
If there is spin on the ball, not statistically wise, but just to know that, like, if somebody has a tendency to something, a lefty or something like that.
Yeah, maybe. You usually say that instead of saying something else. Yeah. I think what you're describing, though, is something, I think you all know this. Be careful about looking at your player, serving the ball, and you think, fantastic serve. lots of movement, lots of velocity, etc. Because for sure that is important. But what is really important is how the opponent passes the ball. And so, trying to figure out a better way to say it. If I hit a fantastic serve, really fantastic serve, to this player, and this player is a fantastic receiver, who wins most of the time? I can't tell you 100%. Who wins?
The receiver.
Yeah, the receiver, for sure. The receiver wins. And it's probably about 3-1, maybe more. Depends on the level. But maybe 4 or 5-1. So my fantastic serve gives me an advantage, but it has to be in a certain area, probably, versus the fantastic receiver. I can beat this receiver sometimes. What else do we want to know about serving? We want to know this. Sure. We want to know how many points you're scoring on your serve directly, especially in the game today with so much emphasis on jump serving and hitting it hard. Yeah, so this is an ace to error ratio. Okay, but we'd like to know just this by itself. You know? And this is a statistic that FIVB uses all the time. Kind of a crazy statistic, but they use it, and they pay a lot of money to players who have the highest ace ratio. And they might be the worst server, but they score a few more points. Yeah.
How many points make each position rotation?
Yeah. Let me get to that in a second, but that's actually right. And what about...
מספר נקודות לפי עמדה או משהו יותר?
This ratio is probably even a little more important than the ace ratio. Yeah. Because one of the statistics, just one of the statistics that tells you a lot about winning and losing, because it is positively correlated with winning and losing, is simply just error ratio, just serving error ratio. Not very highly correlated, and you have to look at a lot of things to get more of a picture, but if you just want one statistic that will tell you a little bit about whether your team can win or lose, don't look at ace ratio, look at error ratio.
הנתון של שגיאות במכת פתיחה הוא נתון שיש לו מטעם חיובי בדרך כלל עם התוצאה של ההפסד הניצחון במערכה. אם אתם רוצים רק על משהו אחד להסתכל, זה הנתון שכדאי להסתכל. זה לא תמיד נכון כמובן, אבל זה נותן תמונה.
Okay, but you're actually missing the most important statistics for serving.
Air?
Huh?
Air?
Errors?
Efficiency.
Got errors right here. Errors.
חסר לנו כאן את הנתון הכי חשוב מבחינתו.
So what's that for the serving team?
Points win for...
Yeah, there you go.
נקודות בסר, נקודות על הסר שלנו. זה הנתון הכי חשוב במכת פתיחה.
So remember PPS and PPR. Points per serve, or points per rotation. Okay. That's really the most important statistic because it's almost perfectly correlated with serving average, which defines receiving success or average. Okay. Not exactly the same because this receiving average could be very low, so my serving is really good. The receiving average is low. Yeah, but we're lousy at blocking, we're lousy at backcourt defense, or the other team is really good at transition attack. And what we really want, what we hope we want, is when this average and this number gets really close. The relationship gets really close.
מה שאנחנו מחפשים, בעצם אני רק אשים את זה בקונטקסט כללי, הוא מדבר פה על איך מסתכלים על סטטיסטיקה, וזה רק דוגמה לאיך מסתכלים על מספרים. הוא לקח את הסרט כדוגמה ושם מספר נושאים, ואומר שנגיע לסוף שהנקודה הכי חשובה היא כמה נקודות, שאנחנו מסתכלים כמה נקודות אנחנו עושים על הסרט שלנו, וכמה נקודות אנחנו עושים בכל רוטציה בהקשר של האברד של הסרט.
Serving average is depend on the number of points you use, but if you use say a 4-point system, so if I serve a 4, it's an ace. I get a point. If I serve a 3, it means that you pass the ball badly enough that maybe you only have one location to set the ball, or it's in the air. A 2, maybe okay, but maybe you can't set the quick. So you have to come up with these definitions. How many of you use some computer statistic system? Okay. So there's real-time data, and real-time data will never have the degree of differentiation by the category. You can't have enough categories because some of the categories, the difference is very small. But if the difference is real, it's important. So you go back after the match, you look, and you can make more critical determination. But passing is not so easy to evaluate. Depends on how good your setter is. Depends on the trajectory of the pass. Depends on a lot of things potentially. But for really good information, we'll agree on most of it. You and I, after a certain period of time.
Right.
Yeah.
But we said we agree that the statistic it's better when we talk about 1 second at a time.
Yeah.
Because of we said, but in 1 set, there's not enough details and not enough balls in each rotation, so we can, during the game, get to see something.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And the point that he made is a really good one. And it has to do with another problem with the 25-point rally score game. The number of actions are relatively few.
Every rotation.
Yes. In every rotation. And the real problem, beyond the evaluation of the players, so beyond the statistics, is, as a coach, you don't have enough information many times to make a good decision about substitution, changing tactics, when to call a timeout, how to affect the game. Game management. It's a challenging game right now. And so your role, you could look at it two ways. Either your role has been reduced, or we talk about coaching as the art and science of coaching. So there's lots of science around coaching, but because the number of actions are relatively small, the art of coaching, the feel you have, the knowledge of your players, the more, the more stored information you have from previous matches about how a player performs, how your team performs, becomes increasingly important. So I couldn't agree more. And so some of the skills, some of the evaluation, we have to look at over a longer period of time. But the variation is going to be wide by set. So, but you have to look at it. Then it gets blended by the match and multiple matches against the same opponent, etc. Lots of ways to do it.
ברור שבסטטיסטיקה צריך לצבור הרבה אינפורמציה כמה שאפשר. הבעיה בללכת לפי מערכה של כמות האינפורמציה קטנה, ושם תפקיד המאמן אולי הוא אפילו יותר גדול ממה שהיה פעם. איך הוא מרגיש את המשחק ומאבחן את המשחק. זה לא שחור לבן.
Anything else about serving? Okay, yeah, please.
There is a lot of influence psychologic in the serve. It's like in soccer, you make the pendant, and or in basketball, you make the 2 shots. So you need to know about the player going to make the serve in the end of the set, or if you want to make him a change from the outside, you must know who he is.
Yeah.
Not also you need to. You don't know how to get to points, but it's very important to know.
I absolutely agree. So I think what you're talking about is as a coach, your philosophy, what you're telling the player, what's the moment in the match, what happened in the rally before, what did the server do before, is the score tied, etc. Yeah.
That's why I think player must have some option of serving, not all the time the same.
So again, I think you're talking about variety of serving. So the player who hits the same serve all the time, I think is not as effective as a player who can do sometimes a jump float serve, sometimes a spike, sometimes serving from zone 1, sometimes serving from zone 5, etc. And so, you know, a lot of things. We know, for example, this distance is much longer than this distance. And
So it's faster.
you can hit the ball harder, but you have more margin for mistake. And so, yeah, there's a lot of psychology to serving. Absolutely, I agree. But ultimately, we have to know the performance of the player. And one of the interesting things that you mentioned is, are you interested in knowing the performance of your player? For example, in the first 20 points of the match, the game, the set, and compare this to the performance after point 20, or maybe point 18, or point 22. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure, but for sure there is a difference. Yeah.
יש הרבה דרכים להסתכל על הסטטיסטיקה, צריך גם לבדוק, אפשר לבדוק על סטטיסטיקה עד נקודה 20 ומ-21, או כל דרך אחרת שאתם רוצים לבדוק, יכול להיות ששחקן.
Want to say like Lisa that maybe something interesting about statistical something is, again, what is the result right now, what is the score right now when you are doing this, like in basketball, sometimes you make different stats in terms of how much time you have until the end of the clock. You know, makes different stats for different players.
Sure. Yeah. I think what we're trying to say is it's complicated. There are a lot of things to consider, and we're just talking about one skill. But this skill, I would suggest to you, maybe argue, is the most critical skill in the game.
הסרב
The most critical. Or at least
הדבר הכי חשוב היום במשחק, ביחס לאלמנטים אחרים במשחק, לכן הוא גם בחר להתמקד בזה, ומנתחים את הנושא.
just your decision about, am I going to teach a jump spike? Am I going to teach a jump float? Am I going to have my player stand on the ground? Am I going to let the player move in different positions? If I have this player and I want this player to serve the ball short to zone 2 or zone 4, maybe he can do it better than him. You know, lots of decisions, but you have to know as much as possible the performance. The most important part of the performance is how is the other team playing when they receive the serve from you or me or this. But we have to know that. Okay?
הוא מדגיש את זה שהסרב נבחן באיך הוא משפיע על המשחק של היריב, ולא אם הוא טוב או לא טוב. טוב או לא טוב זה משהו מאוד סובייקטיבי.
So this already tells you, I think, how we evaluate reception, because it's mostly the reverse. We say inverse. It's really the inverse of serving. So what about...
הערכה בעצם של הקבלה היא השיקוף של הסרב. אז עכשיו אנחנו עוברים לנושא של ההחלטה.
What do we want to know about attacking or spiking? Quickly, we don't want to spend forever on it because we could talk about each skill too much. We never finish. What are actually spiking is too easy. Yeah. What do we want to know about blocking? Tell me how you want to evaluate blocking. Do you evaluate blocking at all? Do you get any score about blocking? Because think for 1 minute about this. Just like serving and reception are inverse to each other. I think we could argue that spiking and blocking are pretty close to the same thing. Okay? But what do we want to know about blocking? How many stuff blocks? How many blocking mistakes?
What happened when the ball touched? How many points touched?
So we're talking about, yeah. So your ability to be a blocker is fundamentally connected to the success of the attacker when you're the blocker. Fundamentally.
את החסימה אנחנו בודקים ביחס להתקפה. לא בפני עצמה, אלא איך היא השפיעה על ההתקפה בצד שני.
You sort of see that?
So only the ball touched the block.
If
the ball didn't touch the block, maybe you made a great block, but you cannot measure it. Yeah. You know, to intimidate, you make this ball, and then it's hard to make.
But yes, everything you say is correct. And I say the same thing. So over time, I don't know how much time, but over some time, if I block 25 times and I never touch the ball, but every time we dig the ball that you hit. Pretty good block, I think, yeah. Pretty good block.
It's difficult to measure.
Well, we can give...
a good block, but
yeah.
Okay, but maybe you pick the ball without blocking.
Maybe.
So it's good block or not good?
But we only have what we can measure. We only have what we can measure to define the performance of the player. So if we believe that the block has some inverse relationship to you as an attacker against me, the problem becomes not making other decisions. We just record the action of the attacker. We record the success or lack of success of the attacker. The issue is sometimes we're blocking together, sometimes they're blocking together, sometimes I'm with him. That's a more complicated issue. But we really would like to know the blocking performance when this pair is together and when this pair is together. We'd really like to know that. And I can tell you absolutely there is a difference when pairs are blocking versus other pairs. Because I'm old and I've been doing this a long time. I know that.
כשאנחנו בוחנים את הסטטיסטיקה בחסימה, אנחנו צריכים לבדוק את החסימה הזוגית בין שני שחקנים.
But that's not so important. block points and block mistakes are not very important, especially for an individual. They don't tell us very much about your ability as a blocker. Okay? They tell us, frankly, much more about the performance of the spiker.
טעויות בחסימה ונקודות בחסימה הם נתון שהוא פחות משמעותי בעיניו.
These numbers depend much more on something else that is not very statistically valid. They depend on how many attempts I have. So if I get more stuffs than you, there's a good chance I had many more opportunities to block. But the average of the attacker against me and the average of the attacker against you doesn't matter how many attempts, so it's equal. Or at least from a statistical point of view, it gives us a much better comparison of our relative abilities as a blocker. Do you guys follow that? You don't have to believe me.
את כמות הניסיונות של החסימה. זה מה שייתן את הנתון באחוזים. יש כאלה שיחסמו כדור אחד מאחד, ויש כאלה שיחסמו אחד מ10. אז צריך לבחון את הדבר.
What else about blocking that you want to know? For your team, what would you like to know about blocking? No, come on, you guys have to know this.
I want to know when the ball hits the blocker, if it's alive, if it can play the ball. If it's side out, or if it's side out,
that is exactly the number that you're going to get if you score the attacker against you as a blocker. You give them some score. If I block the ball and it stays on my side, based on how we control it, that's a very positive play. If I block the ball and it goes out of bounds or it's a kill, that's a negative play because it's a positive play for the attacker. So if we score each one of those on some scale, you can use a number scale or just kill plus 0 minus, just a 3-point scale, it doesn't matter. We're gonna get a ranking of our blockers. What else do we want to know? Really important, I think. Maybe the most important stuff. Do you ever decide to have no block? Do you decide just 2 blockers? Do you decide 3 blockers? Do you decide maybe you're better by yourself than with me? So, yeah. Don't you want to know that, I think? I think we want to know that. So I can tell you that recently, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, because I don't have all the numbers, with 3 blockers versus 2 blockers, what do you think? Better, worse?
Sweet.
Yeah. Okay, so in the world that I was coaching, 3 blockers doubles the point scoring potential, the point scoring number, doubles. Okay?
בזמנו של 3 חוסמים זה היה מכפיל את הסיכוי לקבל חסימה חיובית.
That sounds to me like it's really important to know.
זה נתון שחשוב לדעת.
That's so important.
If the ball passed this blockers, the spike passed the blockers, what's the amount of the contract?
It doesn't matter whether it passes, we block it directly, the hitter hits the ball out of bounds, it doesn't matter. Every time we put 3 blockers against the attack.
About men, yes.
Huh?
About men.
I happen to be talking about high-level men, but for your team, for whatever team, you can know that relate. Maybe it's not different at all. Maybe it's better only 2. Maybe this player blocks better by himself than with me, the middle blocker. Maybe. Lots of teams have that. But if you don't keep some statistic you don't really know.
צריך לבחון את זה סטטיסטית ואז להחליט באיזה שיטה נוהגים במשחק ואיך לאמן את הקבוצה.
So one of the things we want to talk about for you is how do you decide what you're going to spend time on in training?
איך תחליטו על מה להקדיש זמן באימון?
Whatever has the most time, or whatever has the most effect.
That's a really good start, absolutely. So what do you do the most of? You want to spend the most time on. But also, if I were to tell you that every time you have a 3-block defense, you're going to score twice as many times as 2, maybe you'd spend a little more time doing it to try to enhance the number of opportunities that you would have. Maybe you'd spend more time on serving to create more of those opportunities. I don't know. But stuff like that, knowing the overall team number, so it's not the individual number, it's the team number, tells you a lot about how you're going to spend time in practice.
הסטטיסטיקה לדוגמה כזאת, שאתם יודעים, או מאמן מנתח, שהשלושה חוסרים מעלים את אחוז הנקודות ב-50%, אמורה להגיד לו גם על מה הוא צריך לעבוד באימון. אם זאת התוצאה, הוא מן הסתם צריך לעבוד על זה באימון כדי להשיג את התוצאה הזאת במשחק. הסטטיסטיקה צריכה להגיד לנו המאמנים איך לאמן או על מה להקדיש זמן.
So one more skill I want to talk about because it's challenging. How do you evaluate the setter? How do you statistically evaluate the setter?
איך אנחנו מעריכים את המוסר מבחינת סטטיסטית? אם יש מישהו רואה.
Points per set of what? Say that one again. That's a good one.
אחוז ההצלחה בהתקפה.
So we can look at the setter and we can go, that's fantastic. It's really beautiful. Fantastic hands, the ball is always coming out. Fantastic, beautiful. Hitter hits the ball out of bounds into the net. So what we want is to evaluate the result. And so, say, the attack average. Maybe it's the kill percentage, maybe it's attack efficiency, maybe the side out percentage, etc. Then we like to break it down as much as possible, but to start, all we really want to know is what is my team's success when the setter is setting the ball. Good pass, bad pass, transition, side out, doesn't matter. All that, but we really want to know that. And so, because what you think is a perfect set, what I think is a perfect set, what the hitter thinks is a perfect set, could be 3 entirely different things. The result is really what we want.
הנושא של מסירה טובה או לא זה עניין סובייקטיבי, ומה שמעניין זה התוצאה. האם המסירה הביאה לפעולה חיובית?
And the more, sorry for this term, but the more granular we get within each of these statistics, the more specific and detailed we can be in communicating to the player, which is about sports psychology, knowing the player and helping them become better and planning our practice efficiently. The more granular we get, but the big number of the team tells us what we need to spend our time on in a macro sort of approach. that? Any questions? I mean, we could go talk forever about statistics.
לא, שוב, נדבר על זה שהסטטיסטיקה היא כלי עבודה למאמן כדי לדעת מה לעשות באימון, איך לחלק את הזמן באימון. והדברים האלה צריכים להיבחן. הנושא הזה של אחוז ההצלחה בהתקפה הוא מדד למוסר. האם המוסר הוא עושה את העבודה שלו כמו שאתה יכול לו, וצריך לאמן את זה.
Any question on statistics? Anything pretty exciting? Yeah. Make sure you get a speed gun. Make sure you get that.
How much does a speed gun make?
I think there are
Amazon, buy it in Amazon.
yeah, Amazon.com. You can probably get them for, I don't know, under $100, I think now. Yeah. Pretty unbelievable. The technology is really easy and the accuracy is fantastic. I think there are very few programs in the United States that would have a lot of them, maybe. More money. Okay. We'll leave it this. I want to talk. I want to just.
למידה מוטורית, הנושא האחרון שלנו היום, קצת להיות סבלנים.
I think some years ago I might have said to you that the best training for coaching would be maybe physiology or biomechanics, or I don't know, even sports psychology. Today, if I were to tell you, I think I would say the science of motor learning, the science of perceptual motor learning is probably the most relevant to allowing you to become the best coach you can possibly be.
Just a minute. המדע של הלמידה המוטורית לדעתו היום הוא הנושא הכי חשוב למאמנים לדעת, כדי להיות הכי טובים.
And I think it's, of course, important to know nutrition and physiology and mechanical principles, psychology, coaches, a lot of things. But you're going to spend more time in training than you will in the matches, games, and probably more time in planning, training, and in training than doing any other single activity connected with your team. And to do that effectively and appropriately, you have to know something about the principles of motor learning. How do human beings acquire motor patterns and motor skills, and how do they get better? That's really what you're about. You're trying to get motor patterns improved, more efficient, to increase skill. It's the basis upon which I think coaching is founded.
זה נושא קריטי שאנחנו כמאמנים נדע להעביר ונדע לפרש את נושא הלמידה המוטורית של הספורטאים שלנו, של האדם בכלל, כדי שנוכל באמת לקדם אותם, כי זה הדבר שאנחנו עוד נעשה הכי הרבה מול השחקנים.
So if I don't convince you of anything else, it's okay. You should remember this. The game teaches the game. Okay? If you want to get better at playing volleyball, you better play a lot of volleyball.
המשחק מלמד את המשחק. אם אתם רוצים להשתפר במשחק, אתם צריכים לשחק הרבה.
And I hesitate sometimes to say this, but we have some coaches in the U.S. who are doing some pretty good things, and all they do is structure from a very young age players playing the game, really playing the game, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 4-on-4, 5-on-5, 6-on-6. That's all they do, and they're doing pretty well. Now that's not completely following the principles of motor learning, but it's following one of the most important principles of motor learning. And that is, the game teaches the game because there is very little demonstrable transfer of one skill from some other game to volleyball. Very little demonstrable transfer. So if you think that doing things like, I don't know, gymnastics activity or tennis or baseball or whatever is going to make you a better volleyball player, maybe a little bit, but playing volleyball will do it much faster.
אוקיי, תמיד. בניגוד לכל מיני תיאוריות שגם אנחנו מדברים עליהם הרבה, בכדורעף ספציפית, המשחק, אין הרבה ענפים שאפשר לעשות מהם העברה למשחק הכדורעף. אם שחקנים יעשו ענפי ספורט אחרים, 1-2, עדיף להם תיאורטית לשחק כדורעף כדי להיות שחקני כדורעף יותר טוב. זה בגדול. בניגוד לתיאוריה של למידה מוטורית בתיאוריה, אבל זה חלק מהלמידה המוטורית.
So I'm just going to talk about a few principles of motor learning because you can go on the internet and get thousands of articles, hundreds of thousands of pages about motor learning principles, and there's new research being done all the time. But some things I think are pretty important. So I think you should know this one. Blocked practice versus randomized practice. That means it's not going to be nearly as effective for you to teach serving if you have the player back there serving the ball 10 or 15 or 20 times in a row. That doesn't happen like the game. Maybe occasionally it does happen like the game with very young players, but most of the time it doesn't.
אז אני לא יודע בדיוק את המושגים המקצועיים, אבל זה אימון פתוח.
זה תרגול בבלוק מול תרגול יחידני. זה כמו שאתה עושה מספר פעמים את המיומנות, עושה פעם, הולך לעשות משהו אחר, עושה פעם, עושה משהו אחר. אבי, אני אביא לך סיפר.
לא לעשות חזרות.
אני אביא לך סיפר למידה מוטורית.
אני הבנתי את זה כאופן בלוק, זה משהו מאוד מסוים, ורנדום זה משהו מקרי, כן? איך שקורה.
זה לא מקרי, תיכנסו לאינטרנט, תדעו. יש לכם מחשבים
Blocking doesn't mean to block. It's concentrating one skill over and over again, consecutively with nothing else happening.
Pass the ball in here.
So there will be times when, because of I'm by myself in practice. I have 45 players. I have one net, and I don't have very many balls, or something like that. I don't know. We're gonna violate these principles a lot of times. So you do it as little as possible, but to concentrate the repetition of a single skill in a concentrated time is not the way the game actually happens. We want to put our players in a situation as much as possible, most of the time, where we're simulating the game. So
לשים את השחקנים במצבי משחק באימון ולא במשימות מוגדרות עם הרבה חזרות.
Randomized practice is more the way the game happens. Now, the game also tends to happen this way. Pass, set, hit. Pass, set, hit.
זה הסדר של המשחק.
And so, I'll tell you that most exercises, most drills should be something like pass, set, hit. Could be dig, set, hit, free ball, set, hit, lock, cover, set, hit. Could be a lot of different ways to get the ball to the setter, but it's something in that sequence, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. That's more randomized. Could be serve, pass, set, hit. Yes? So you understand the issue, okay?
לעשות יותר תרגילים כאלה שמדמים מצבי המשחק. אפשר לחזור עליהם הרבה מאוד פעמים, כי בעצם כל כדור זה משהו טיפה אחר.
Also easy to understand. It's better for learning if we separate the teaching of a particular part of the game into different moments during the practice. So we're not just teaching attacking at one time, but it's distributed across the practice. And part of the reason for that is that we want the feedback and the reinforcement that we give to the player to happen at different times. If it all happens at one time, it doesn't stick, it's not embedded, it doesn't change behavior as effectively as if it's distributed at several times during the practice. So let's take...
ממליץ לעבוד על נושאים לא פעם אחת במשך האימון, אלא לפזר אותם לאורך האימון ולעבוד עליהם לאורך כל האימון. כי כל פעם יהיה לזה השפעות אחרות.
So for example, if you want to work on serving 2 or 3 different times during practice, even if you do it in a blocked manner. And sometimes it's just simply easier to do that. You know, and we're not so creative every day, although it would be nice if we were. But do it 3 or 4 times during practice instead of just once for a long concentrated period. All right? So that's an important part. Mass training of a single skill is not nearly as effective as distributing it during practice. This is a pretty easy one. Actually, these are all pretty easy, and most of you know them. Don't just practice one skill. Because the game isn't like that, we already know that. Because I've already told you about pass that hit, etc. The game teaches the game, so we want to try to do multi-skill activities as early as possible. And
לא ללמד רק מיומנות אחת, לתרגל מיומנות אחת, אבל מספר מיומנויות לתרגל אחד. Yeah, just a small question. Are you referring also for youth, junior ages, or just adults? Let's say about the technical skills.
Yeah. You know, it changes a little bit with age, and nobody is really perfect at applying purely motor learning skills to coaching, but as much as possible, even with 10 or 12-year-olds young, these principles apply. In the world of motor learning, the word progression, how many of you, all of us as coaches at some point did progressions, you know? We added certain conditions to teaching our skills to our players. You know, we thought we start with something very simple and we go to something more complex. Most of the research in motor learning tells you that progressions are actually counterproductive to teaching skills. Okay? Because of this overriding issue. Okay? So, a little bit, understand this last one.
What do you mean again?
Progressions aren't so good. Yeah. Start out,
so you
and I passing the ball back and forth, and then we go a little bit further away, and we pass back and forth, and we go a little further away. That's a progression. Not so good. We're going to start right here. This is how far we have to be able to pass the ball. Something like this.
בגדול ללכת לתרגל את התוצר הסופי ולא את התהליך לאט לאט. היא הדרגתיות.
Another principle of motor learning. Whole is better than part. Don't teach the skill with, for example, spiking. Probably we've all done this. I've done this more than any of you probably, maybe 1 or 2. We're going to teach spiking with just an arm swing first, maybe against the wall. We're going to teach how to spike against the wall. You already know the game teaches the game, and nobody spikes in the game against the wall. Usually, it doesn't happen. Sometimes, by mistake, they do that. And they're going to do it more often if you let them teach, if you teach the spiking against the wall. So, we want as early as possible to teach our players the skill happens in the whole concept. So maybe we're going to just throw the ball, they're going to run, jump, and hit it. Okay? And
לא למד את הטכניקה בחלקים, אלא ילד את השלם. מיומנות.
What's more important? Don't get angry.
I'm coaching for the last 22 years young players all the time. I know that especially the Americans
שיקפוץ, לגבור את הרגליים, לגבור את הגב. כך ילד צריך לקבל אותו זינוק, בכדור, תגן לקפוץ.
I'm a big fan of balance. I like balance. Yeah. So I tend to agree with that. And but just understand the principle. Understand the principle. And for example, what's more important? Control or power for attacking? What's more important? Control or power? I think so. I think the reverse. It's very difficult, and there is, again, quite a bit of research. It's complicated, but it's very difficult to increase power, which is speed of arm movement, later in the individual's path to acquiring motor skill. If we teach power, if we can teach power, which means really speed of arm movement at a young age, much easier when they get bigger to teach control. It's not perfect, no? No. Okay. That's good. Good beat. Just telling you.
אוקיי, יש לך פיקוח סיסטמט, כמובן שכל אחד יכול להגיד את דעתו. אני מתרגע את מה שהוא אומר, שעדיף ללמד או לאמן כוח בגיל צעיר ורק בגיל יותר מבוגר את השליטה בכדור, או שנקרא לזה, מאשר הפוך.
You could be exactly right. I've made lots of mistakes. A lot of mistakes. So, what else do I want to tell you?
Speaking of mistakes, how do you address that? You're letting players, you're encouraging to hit power, then you allow them to make more mistakes or practice.
I think it happens, but you're also if we pay attention as much as possible to motor learning principles, we structure the activity to force, to a certain degree, maybe a lot, the expected outcome. And we reward that outcome. And there are lots of ways to do that, some better than others. But the drill defines the goal. Not me telling you, you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. I have to put you in a situation where that outcome equals success because I define what success means, not how to do it. And to a certain degree, significant actually, the degree, it's called movement exploration. that's one of the reasons why coaching is so challenging, I think. Because we have to structure the activity to realize the outcome that we're trying to get the player to do. And then, with the appropriate feedback, the appropriate reinforcement of what actions we want, get it more than we don't. But nothing's perfect. Human beings are sadly not like machines. They work that way.
אוקיי. אנחנו כמאמנים צריכים להגדיר איזה תוצאה אנחנו רוצים, אבל התרגיל עצמו שאנחנו נבחר הוא בעצם יגדיר את זה. אנחנו צריכים לשים את השחקנים בסיטואציה שאנחנו רוצים שהם יהיו כדי שהם יוכלו להגיע למטרה הזאת.
I wrote this down because it's a pretty common situation in volleyball training. And you see almost all the highest level teams, national teams, spend a lot of time playing pepper. Huh? You know what pepper is. We hit the ball back and forth. It's mostly maybe it can be good for increasing blood flow, body temperature. That's about it, I think. Something like that. But we all do it. We all do it. It falls into the culture and the tradition of the sport, not your team's culture and tradition. So, for example,
אנחנו מדברים על הפפר שהוא טוען שבתכלס לא נותן הרבה, אבל הוא שייך לתרבות של המשחק.
Mostly we do it this way, huh? Parallel to the net. How much of the game is actually played parallel to the net? Almost nothing. A little bit, but almost nothing. So it would be better if we did it this way. That would be better. Okay? A little bit, because it's a little more, the game teaches the game-like. Would be even better if this player only hit at that player. A little bit better if the player by the net only hit at the player in the backcourt. Then they can switch. Because how many times do you have your back to the net to dig a ball? Could happen, but not very often. Might be better if we have a hitter over the net hitting at a player and the setter is at the net. But of course then the setter is setting the ball over the net. That happens, but hope not very often.
עדיף לשים שחקן בצד שני ושהמוסר ימסור את הכדור מעבר לרשת אחרי ההגנה, שזה גם לא מצב משחק.
Just ideas. If you go into the U.S. team practice, you won't see this pepper. To warm up before a match, you're going to see some of this.
בארצות הברית כבר בנבחרת הלאומית לא תראו פפר באימון. אולי לפני משחק.
Okay. Questions? Disagreements?
שאלות,
I really like that.
הערות, ויכוחים.
Yeah.
About the progression. We start seeing the level of difficulty higher. It's good for play, let's concentrate on things, but not concentrate. So, learning things to compliment is sometimes you look at small things, sometimes you look at big picture. So,
I agree completely, and the point that you make is a good one. And so the comment would only be spend a little bit less time on the progression, go through it a little bit faster, try to get to a situation where it's not a single skill, you're introducing the same parameters of the game, more distance, more speed, more decision making, etc. And I think we're going to talk. To me, one of the interesting things to talk about with coaches is what are the lessons you've learned as a coach. So I don't know, you've coached 20 years or 10 years, you know, try to tell me what the lessons are. I'll tell you the lessons I've learned as a coach. I think one of the lessons, I don't want to jump into this other session, but one of the lessons that I think is a big one is don't put limits on your players. The players will put their own limits, and usually they'll be much higher than yours. And so you'd be surprised. For sure, you've all seen some video or film of very young children, really young, 10, 11, maybe younger, playing volleyball in a very sophisticated way. If not, I can send to you easily. There's lots of it on the internet, lots of it. And
בעיקרון לא עושים מגבלות לשחקן בתרגיל, ואז לא לראות אותו מתפתח.
Players surprise us all the time with what they can do. And so I'm not telling you you must do these things 100%. But the more the training can be appropriate from a motor learning perspective, the better the skill acquisition will be in a game-like situation. And let me tell you another one that's, I think, also...
ככל שהתרגיל יהיה דומה למצב המשחק, ככה ההטמעה של השחקן לתוך המשחק תהיה יותר קלה. הוא יפגוש את זה במשחק אחרי שהוא כבר תרגל את זה בעצם.
In the United States, there's a very big industry about youth-level private sport clubs. They're different, I think, than the sport clubs in Israel and Europe generally. So these are almost always a single sport. So junior volleyball clubs, it's huge. We have about 6,000, 7,000 in the United States. Junior clubs, some of them 500 or 600 players, just playing volleyball. But we also have track and field, gymnastics, archery, all the sports, almost all the sports. Because the sport is moving away from the school into a private environment. So you start a club, everybody starts a club. And because it's your business, you want the players to only play volleyball. And the coach at the high school also wants the players to only play volleyball. But there is some really good data and studies that say if the young kids, I don't know, age 8 until maybe 15, 16, 17, play more than one sport, 3 sports, 4 sports, they will be better at the sport that they ultimately decide is their favorite sport, whether it's volleyball or softball or track, than if they only play that one sport exclusively from the time they start.
But that contradicts your...
It does. It's interesting, huh? In the way it does, yeah. But it's really good data. Yeah. But it doesn't mean necessarily that it's contradictory, because they weren't in this situation where they were getting this specific sport feedback They're just experiencing different coaches, different environments, different teammates, maybe one individual sport, two team sports, etc. And the play theory, the exploration of sport and movement, overweighs almost everything. The joy of playing is really important. Really good data. And some really high profile, very high profile professional coaches in the United States are starting to become very public about wanting the players to start with 2 or 3 sports. Football coaches, it's a very positive, I think, movement in sport broadly. So it's pretty interesting.
Okay, I want to summarize. היה מאוד מעניין מבחינתי, אישית. אני חושב שמה כמובן כל אחד ייקח מכאן מה שמתאים לו. אני חושב שמה שחשוב לי כשאנחנו נלמד כמאמנים זה בעצם, ומה שדג הציג פה, זה איזושהי תפיסת עולם שלמה של האימון בכל הרמות שלה, מהרמה הפסיכולוגית, דרך המוטורית, דרך הכדורעף. ואחרי שנדע מה אנחנו רוצים להשיג, נבנה אנחנו, אתם, את הקבוצה, את האימונים, לפי המטרות שאתם תציבו לעצמכם. אני חושב שניתנו פה כלים למחשבה, לאו דווקא תרגילים ספציפיים, אבל איך לחשוב על הכדורעף, איך לבוא לקבוצה, לאימון. ואני חושב שזה, אני שמח לראות פה הרבה אנשים צעירים וגם יותר מבוגרים, שכדורעף זה המקצוע שלהם. בזמני, שאני הבנתי, זה לא היה ככה. וזה יפה וזה מבורך, וזה נותן לכם זמן באמת להשקיע בדבר הזה, גם מחשבה, לא זמן של אימון. אני חושב שזה מה שאני כאילו ככה הבנתי את המסר שדאג רצה להעביר, וכמובן דברים ספציפיים, פיזיים ודברים כאלה. Okay, so now we have an open session, right? with Beppe in נתניה. יש לנו אימון פתוח, שתוכלו להתרשם. אני אשמח אם תעברו לשם גם אם אתם חוצים הביתה, אז תקדישו עוד שעה, חצי שעה. יש הרבה מה ללמוד ממנו, בדרך שהוא מעביר אימון ואיך שהוא עובד. ומחר ניפגש כאן ב-10, tomorrow we meet you at 10. Thank you very much.